When you break your arm, an X-ray shows a clean, jagged white line.
Right.
It's just right there on the screen, broken or not broken. It's completely binary.
Yeah, it's undeniable.
Exactly. And it's comforting in a weird way, because the problem is visible, it's categorized. But step into a human argument, whether you're debating a stranger online or standing in your kitchen with your spouse, and that X-ray machine just shatters.
Oh, completely shatters.
Suddenly you're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just completely murky. I mean, have you ever been in an argument where the other person's claim is so completely detached from reality, so utterly baffling, that your internal monologue is just screaming, you are totally insane?
Oh, yeah. It is, honestly, it's one of the most isolating feelings in the human experience.
Right. Yeah.
You're standing there armed with facts,
Yeah.
with a clear sequence of events, maybe even with receipts, right? And the person across from you is operating in a totally different dimension of reality.
And your first instinct is you just want to spit out those facts. You think, if I just explain this clearly enough.
If I just show them the evidence.
Yes. If I show them the literal evidence of their error, they'll just snap out of it. But it never works. It literally never works.
No, it backfires almost every single time.
So today, welcome to this deep dive. We are going on a mission to equip you with the ultimate toolkit for navigating these impossible arguments. We're tearing apart the mechanics of civil discourse, logical fallacies, and, how to disarm completely ridiculous claims.
And we are not keeping this theoretical.
No way. We're going to test these tools on the wildest extremes. We're going to figure out how you talk to, like, a flat earther.
Which is always fun.
Always. And then we're going to bring it right into your living room to navigate the most intense, logic-defying marital conflicts.
Because the goal here is to understand why that instinct, the urge to throw facts at an emotional wall, why that backfires.
Yeah.
And we want to give you a framework to transform frustrating cyclical arguments into moments of genuine understanding.
Right. We're synthesizing a ton of stuff today. We're pulling from parliamentary debate rules, psychological models of nonviolent communication, game theory, all to show you how to maintain your sanity when the person you're talking to seems to have lost theirs.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. So if we're going to figure out how to dismantle absurd arguments, we first need to understand the architecture of a functioning argument.
A foundation.
Exactly. Before a building can stand, you need a foundation. In the realm of debate, that foundation is built on what organizations like Braver Angels call the 3 rules of civil discourse. And Braver Angels, they're a group that literally runs workshops to depolarize extreme political conflict.
Right. They bring people from totally opposite ends of the political spectrum into the exact same room.
Which sounds like a nightmare. How do they keep those rooms from descending into absolute chaos?
Well, they enforce a really rigid framework. It's rooted in parliamentary procedure. And the very first pillar of that Rule 1 is the sanctity of truth.
The sanctity of truth.
Yeah, philosophers often refer to it as facticity. To put it simply, facticity means that truth is not a plastic, malleable thing that just changes based on what the participants want. Before you can argue about what a fact means, you have to agree that the fact actually exists.
No. Okay, so it's like a juridical model.
Exactly.
Like if we're in a courtroom, the prosecution and the defense are going to argue passionately about whether the defendant is guilty. But they both have to agree on the evidentiary record, right?
Right. They have to agree that the fingerprint on the glass belongs to the defendant.
Yeah. If there's a disagreement over whether that fingerprint even exists, everything just halts. You cannot debate the meaning of the fingerprint until you negotiate the truth of its existence.
And that procedural halt is essential. If you bypass it, you're basically building an argument on sand. Which brings us to Rule 2, the preservation of the interlocutor.
Preservation of the interlocutor. That sounds very formal.
It does, but it just mandates that you must be soft on the people, but relentlessly hard on the ideas. In formal debate, they actually use a boxing metaphor. A champion boxer's skill is only proven by the strength of their opponent.
Right.
So you want your opponent to be strong, but you absolutely do not hit below the belt.
Meaning like no personal attacks, no ridicule.
Exactly. Ridicule isn't just rude. It's a mechanical failure in logic. It's an ad hominem attack.
Because you're abandoning the intellectual merit of the argument to attack the character or the intelligence or the identity of the person making it.
Right. If you attack the person, you disqualify them from the process, and the debate just collapses into a street fight.
You have to leave your identity and your ego at the door. The only currency allowed in the room is the merit of your reasoning.
Which is tough for people to do.
It really is. Which brings us to Rule 3. And honestly, I think this is the hardest one for human beings to swallow. Rule 3 is the externalization of scoring.
It completely shifts the paradigm of why we argue. Rule 3 states that only your opponent can award you points.
Think about how radical that is. When we argue, especially in public or like online, we're usually performing for an audience.
Oh, 100%. We want the retweets.
We want the applause, the people in the comments saying, oh, you destroyed them. But under Rule 3, you're engaged in a collaborative inquiry. The goal is learning, not performing.
Right. If your opponent makes a valid objection to your point, you don't double down. You acknowledge it.
You actually award them a point.
Yeah. And these 3 rules, agreeing on facts, separating the idea from the person, and making the goal mutual understanding rather than public victory, they are the scaffolding of a functioning democracy.
And as we'll see later, they're the scaffolding of a functioning marriage, too.
Absolutely. But there's a massive caveat here.
Uh-oh.
These rules only work if both parties are actually trying to build something.
Which brings us to the villain of our story. What happens when you try to apply these beautiful, rational rules to someone who refuses to play the game? What happens when you encounter the archetype that epistemology texts call the gingerbread man?
The gingerbread man. To really understand this, we need to take a quick detour into how human beings actually communicate. Back in the 70s, a philosopher named Paul Grice established something called the cooperative principle.
Okay.
He realized that for conversation to work at all, both people have to unconsciously agree to cooperate. Grice broke this down into several maxims, but the 2 most important for us today are the maxim of quantity and the maxim of quality.
Let me make sure I'm visualizing this right. If I ask you, where are my car keys? And you reply, they are somewhere within the physical universe, you have violated the maxim of quantity.
Yes.
Because you haven't given me enough specific information to be helpful at all.
Right. And if you ask me where your keys are, and I say, oh, a golden eagle swooped through the window and took them, knowing full well they're just in your jacket pocket.
Then you violated the maxim of quality.
Exactly. I've said something I have no evidence for, and that I know is false. We evolve these maxims because humans are social creatures. We need to share accurate information to survive.
The cooperative principle is like the invisible glue of human interaction.
And the gingerbread man takes that glue and dissolves it. The gingerbread man is the ultimate bad faith debater. Instead of standing their ground and cooperating, they just run.
Hence the name. Catch me if you can.
Right. They categorically refuse to state a positive position. They weaponize ambiguity. They flout the maxims of quality and quantity by withholding clear information about what they actually believe. And they make these incredibly vague assertions without any backing.
And when you try to clarify, when you employ civil discourse and paraphrase their position back to them just to make sure you're understanding.
They dodge. They say, I never said that. Or, you're putting words in my mouth. Go back and read my exact words.
They create this impenetrable, blurry wall of rhetoric.
They really do. There's a massive framework for analyzing how humans argue called pragma dialectics. It outlines the specific rules for a critical discussion, and the gingerbread man shatters several of them. But the most destructive violation is Rule 2, the burden of proof rule.
Ah, the burden of proof. It's the cornerstone of logical discourse. It states that if you put forward a standpoint, you are obliged to defend it. Like if I come to you and say, I have a dragon in my garage, the burden is entirely on me to open the garage door and show you the dragon.
But the gingerbread man flips this entirely. They look at you and say, I have a dragon in my garage. Prove to me that I don't.
Which is a classic logical fallacy.
Yes, it's known as the appeal to ignorance. Argumentum ad ignorantium. It's the assertion that a claim must be true simply because it hasn't yet been proven false.
We see this all the time, and it is so infuriating. The astrophysicist Carl Sagan famously used that invisible dragon analogy to explain why this is maddening.
The great analogy.
If you tell me to prove the dragon isn't in your garage, I might say, okay, let's spread flour on the floor to capture its footprints. And you reply, oh, well, this dragon hovers. So I say, fine, let's use infrared sensors to detect its body heat. And you counter with, it breathes heatless fire and its body is room temperature. You just keep moving the goalposts.
Right. The philosopher Richard Carrier has another really great analogy for this. The yellow monkeys on a rainy Tuesday. Imagine someone claims that deep in the Amazon jungle, there's a species of bright yellow monkeys. But these monkeys only appear on rainy Tuesdays, and only when they actually want to be seen.
That is completely unfalsifiable. It's logically impossible for me to go to the Amazon and prove they don't exist, because if I sit there on a rainy Tuesday and don't see any yellow monkeys, you just shrug and say, well, they obviously didn't want to be seen today.
Exactly. And what's happening psychologically here is a massive imbalance in cognitive load. When someone shifts the burden of proof, they're building that blurry wall we mentioned. If you try to attack a blurry wall, you are punching fog.
And that's exhausting.
It literally is. The human brain burns actual calories trying to process complex information and solve problems.
Yeah.
When you try to disprove a negative, when you try to prove that yellow monkeys don't exist anywhere in the Amazon, your brain is working in overdrive, trying to account for infinite possibilities.
Because to definitively prove something doesn't exist anywhere, you would have to be omniscient. You have to be everywhere at once.
Meanwhile, the gingerbread man is expending zero cognitive energy. They are just sitting back comfortably, inventing new caveats. The dragon hovers. The monkeys are hiding. They exhaust you while remaining perfectly rested.
Okay, let's unpack this. If I'm arguing with someone who says, prove to me the moon landing wasn't faked, they are demanding I hunt for the invisible dragon. They're making a massive, sweeping negative claim that the entire historical record, thousands of scientists, endless footage, it's all a fabrication, and they're shifting the burden of proof onto me to validate every single piece of data in human history.
Yes.
But how do we enforce Rule 1, that sanctity of truth, when the gingerbread man explicitly refuses to share a reality?
You can't.
You just can't.
You really can't. If you try to meet them on their terms, you're going to drown in the fog. The only way to engage a gingerbread man is to establish what's called a criteria-based requirement. You have to force them to define the limits of their own blurry wall.
You ask them what it would take to change their mind.
Exactly. You ask them, what specific, tangible piece of evidence would you accept to prove that the moon landing happened? You force them to name the conditions under which they'd admit they're wrong.
And what if they can't?
If they cannot or will not name a single piece of evidence that would change their mind, then they have just admitted out loud that their position is unfalsifiable.
Wow. They're admitting it's not an argument based on facts, it's just a closed belief system, a dogma.
And once that's established, you know that Rule 1 cannot be met. You cannot negotiate facts with someone who has insulated themselves from all facts. The debate cannot proceed, and you are free to walk away without exhausting yourself.
So how do we apply these lofty parliamentary rules and cognitive theories when the person across from us is arguing something objectively absurd? Let's take these tools for a spin on a hypothetical flat earther.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's say you're at a family gathering and you're cornered by your uncle, who has recently become a hardcore flat earther.
The immediate temptation for almost everyone in that scenario is to resort to the straw man fallacy.
A straw man is when you deliberately weaken, exaggerate, or caricature your opponent's argument to make it incredibly easy to knock down. So your uncle starts talking about the horizon, and you just roll your eyes and say, oh, so you think we're just living on a giant cosmic pancake, and if I sail a boat too far, I'm going to fall off the edge into space.
And it feels incredibly satisfying to say that in the moment, right?
Oh, yeah. It gets a laugh from the rest of the table.
But mechanically, you have just violated Rule 2. You introduced ridicule, you've hit below the belt, and disqualified your uncle as a rational actor.
And the second you do that, his ego defense mechanisms lock into place. He will never listen to another word you say because you aren't debating him anymore. You're mocking him.
Exactly. The antidote to the straw man is a concept called the steel man. Instead of building a weak, exaggerated version of their argument, you actively construct the strongest, most robust, most rational possible version of what they're trying to say. You make their argument better than they could make it themselves.
There is a fantastic framework for this, championed by the philosopher Daniel Dennett. He popularized a set of guidelines known as Rappaport's Rules. They were named after Anatole Rappaport, a mathematical psychologist and game theorist. Rappaport's rules are like the ultimate guide to steel manning.
But it's not just a list you read off. It's a psychological progression. The first move you make when confronted with an absurd argument is to suppress your own instinct to attack. You have to listen closely enough to restate their position vividly and fairly.
And the benchmark for this is that your opponent has to hear your summary and say, wow, thanks, I couldn't have put it better myself.
Yes. That's step 1. Step 2 is you have to find common ground. You have to list points of agreement, no matter how small they are.
And step 3 is you have to genuinely mention something you've learned from them during the conversation.
Right. And it's only after you've done those 3 things, restated their case perfectly, found common ground, and express gratitude for learning something that you are permitted to offer a single word of rebuttal.
I mean, this sounds absolutely exhausting. You're asking me to step inside the mind or the epistemology of someone whose worldview I find ridiculous.
It requires immense intellectual humility. But let's play it out. Try applying the first step of Rappaport's rules to your flat earther uncle. How do you restate his position so well that he thanks you?
Okay, I have to suppress the pancake joke.
Just trust the pancake.
I have to look for the core of how he knows what he thinks he knows. So I might say something like, okay, uncle, let me make sure I'm understanding your worldview. It sounds like you deeply value empirical sensory data. You prioritize what you can actually see and feel with your own eyes over what institutions tell you. When you look at the horizon, it looks perfectly flat. When you stand still, you don't feel the earth spinning at thousands of miles an hour. Furthermore, you look at history and see that large, centralized power structures and governments have frequently lied to the public to maintain control and hide corruption. Therefore, taking the word of a massive, heavily funded government agency like NASA without direct personal scientific verification feels intellectually irresponsible to you.
That is brilliant. If you say that to a flat earther, you will watch their entire physiological posture change. The defensive crossed arms will drop. Their eyes will light up, and they will say, yes, exactly. Finally, someone gets it.
Because I haven't actually attacked the shape of the Earth. I haven't mentioned the curvature or satellites.
Right. You identify their underlying epistemological stance. You recognize their reliance on personal empiricism and their deep skepticism of authority.
But wait, this brings up a huge point of pushback. We synthesized a lot of sources for this deep dive, and there's a fascinating thread on the Change My Views subreddit that tackles this exact technique. And a lot of users argue that steel-manning a terrible argument is actually dangerous.
How so?
The critique is, doesn't this just do the bad faith actor's job for them? If someone is pushing a reality-denying conspiracy theory, and I use my own vocabulary and rhetorical skills to make them sound hyperlogical and deeply philosophical, aren't I just giving them unearned credibility? Am I not spreading their rhetoric for them?
It is a totally valid concern. If you steelman a dangerous ideology to a broad audience, you might accidentally recruit people to it. But the counter-insight from that same discussion is crucial. The rule is, don't steelman the argument. Steelman the person.
Let's break that distinction down. What is the difference?
When you steelman the argument, you try to find scientific validity for the flat earth, which is impossible and foolish. When you steelman the person, you are validating their underlying human motivation. In your example, you didn't validate the claim that the earth is a disk. You validated his desire for truth.
Ah.
You validated his skepticism of power, which is a healthy democratic impulse. You validated his reliance on his own senses. You separated the human being who wants to be smart and independent from the flawed logical conclusion he arrived at.
So you're finding the humanity underneath the absurdity. You are validating the need, not the strategy.
Exactly. And this separation of person and idea is the most difficult thing for human beings to do because we naturally fuse our ideas with our identities. The journalist Shane Snow wrote a brilliant piece on debate tactics that illustrates this perfectly. He uses a highly provocative, seemingly trivial question to show how quickly we fuse our beliefs with our sense of self. He asks, would Beyoncé have gotten to where she is without Jay-Z?
Oh, wow. That is a conversational hand grenade. You drop that at a dinner party and watch the room explode.
Oh, absolutely, because it's designed to create intense cognitive friction. Snow points out that cognitive friction, the clash of differing ideas and perspectives, is the engine of human progress. It is incredibly productive right up until the exact moment that things get personal. When you ask about Beyoncé and Jay-Z, people immediately tie the question to their own identities, to systemic misogyny, to the history of men taking credit for women's labor.
It stops being a debate about music industry logistics and becomes a proxy war for a deeply personal issue. If I argue that Jay-Z's industry connections were instrumental to her early solo career, you might stop hearing my argument about record label distribution and start hearing me say that women cannot succeed without men.
And the moment you hear that, your brain registers a threat. Not a threat to your musical trivia knowledge, but a threat to your values, your identity, and your safety in the social hierarchy. Your amygdala, the primitive threat-detecting part of your brain, fires up. You enter a defensive posture.
And when the amygdala hijack happens, logic goes straight out the window.
Completely. Snow writes that when we feel personally attacked, we stop using evidence and start using what he calls trump cards. We pull rank. We say things like, well, I have 30 years of experience in business, so I know how this works. Or, as a woman, I have lived this reality, so your opinion is invalid.
Which again violates Rule 2. We are no longer preserving the interlocutor. We are trying to disqualify them based on their identity or our own perceived emotional superiority.
The only way out of that spiral, according to Snow, is to actively depersonalize the language. You have to manually put distance between yourself and your ideas. Instead of saying, I know for a fact that X is true, you say, my current hypothesis is X.
It sounds clinical.
It does, but it models intellectual humility. It signals to the other person's amygdala, I am not attacking your identity. I am just examining this idea.
Okay, it's one thing to stay calm and use Rappaport's rules with an uncle who watches too many YouTube videos, or to depersonalize a pop culture debate about Beyoncé. But what happens when the invisible dragon isn't in a garage? What happens when the person shifting the burden of proof, the person flouting Grice's maxims and refusing to share a factual reality, is your spouse?
Now we're entering the deepest, most turbulent waters of this deep dive. We're pivoting from the public square to the living room.
And we're not talking about normal marital bickering here. We aren't talking about negotiating laundry schedules or who forgot to run the dishwasher. We are talking about extreme reality-bending accusations, the kind of statements that make your jaw drop and your heart race. Things like, you don't love me enough, or you hate me, or my personal favorite, you bought me that gift in order to make me look stupid.
From an analytical standpoint, these intimate arguments are fascinating because they utilize the exact same logical fallacies we see in the public sphere. The gingerbread man, the shifting burden of proof, the unfalsifiable claims, but they're supercharged with intense emotional history and attachment trauma.
Let's dissect a specific scenario based on the psychology frameworks we've been looking at. Let's use the gift example. Your spouse looks at you and says, you bought that gift to make me look stupid. It feels insane to hear that. Because mechanically, it is insane. It's an appeal to ignorance combined with the fallacy of mind reading. They're demanding that you prove a negative. Prove to me that you did not have a secret malicious intent when you bought this.
And just like proving there isn't an invisible, heatless, fire-breathing dragon in the garage, it is empirically impossible to prove the absence of a secret malicious thought in your own head. You cannot provide a brain scan that shows zero malice.
Let me paint the visceral picture of how this usually plays out. Let's put you, the listener, in these shoes. You love your wife deeply. You think she's the most beautiful woman in the world. It's your anniversary, and you spend weeks picking out a beautiful necklace for her. You are so excited. She opens the box, looks at the necklace, looks at you coldly, and accuses you of plotting to humiliate her with a piece of jewelry that draws attention to her neck, which is an area she is deeply insecure about.
Oh, man. The trap is set.
Your internal monologue is screaming, you are totally insane. That makes absolutely no logical sense. Why would I spend money to make the person I love feel bad? But obviously you don't say that out loud. You try to be the rational adult. You try to rely on Rule 1, the sanctity of truth. You present the facts. You say in a calm voice, honey, that is simply not true. I bought it because I love you very much, and you are obviously very beautiful to me.
It is a perfectly factual, logically sound, emotionally regulated response.
And her response to your perfect logic. She crosses her arms and says, I can tell you're lying to me. I know you better than you know yourself.
Checkmate. The gingerbread man has struck in the living room. You are officially punching the blurry wall.
Why does the factual, calm response fail so spectacularly here? I presented the evidence. I clearly stated my intent. Why does it make her dig in deeper?
It fails because of a concept discussed by the physicist Wolfgang Pauli called the not even wrong syndrome. Pauli used this phrase to describe scientific papers that were so vague, so poorly reasoned, and so untestable that they couldn't even be classified as incorrect. They weren't even playing the game of science. When your spouse says, I know you better than you know yourself, you secretly wanted to humiliate me, that claim is not even wrong. It's completely undetectable by standard logic.
Because it relies on an unexpressed premise. This brings us right back to pragmadialectics, specifically Rule 5, the unexpressed premise rule.
By treating a deeply emotional accusation as a factual debate, the husband is playing the wrong game. He is applying Rule 1, trying to negotiate the empirical facts of the receipt and his conscious intent to a situation where the facts are entirely irrelevant to the actual conflict.
So, if I am the husband in this scenario, what on earth am I supposed to do? If I can't use facts, and I can't tell her she's committing a burden of proof fallacy, because, frankly, telling your angry wife she's committing an argumentum ad ignorantium is a great way to end up divorced. Am I just supposed to agree with a false reality? Am I supposed to say, you're right, I am a cartoon villain who plotted to humiliate you? That violates the sanctity of truth entirely. I am not going to lie and confess to malice I don't harbor.
No, no, you absolutely do not agree with a false reality.
Oh.
Capitulating to an absurdity breeds resentment. To navigate this impossible bind, we have to introduce another major psychological framework.
Right.
Nonviolent communication, or NVC, developed by the clinical psychologist Marshall Rosenberg. Rosenberg's work is incredibly powerful in dealing with people who resist clarity and refuse to speak factually.
NVC operates on one radical core tenet. Human conflicts are almost never disagreements over needs. They're disagreements over the strategies used to meet those needs.
Every human being on Earth shares the same universal baseline needs. We all have a need for safety, for autonomy, for respect, to feel seen and to feel loved. When one of those fundamental needs is unmet, our body produces a negative emotion as a warning signal.
But the tragedy of human communication is that when we are triggered, we rarely possess the feelings-based language to articulate the unmet need.
Exactly. When your spouse says, "You bought this to make me look stupid," she is not actually talking about the necklace. The physical gift is just the trigger. But because she is overwhelmed by the negative emotion, perhaps a deep, terrifying insecurity about aging, or a fear that she is losing her attractiveness, she cannot articulate the raw vulnerability of the feeling. So she resorts to attacking the action. The accusation, as insane and uncharitable as it sounds to the husband, is actually a tragic, clumsy, backwards expression of an unmet need for reassurance.
The NVC community uses a brilliant metaphor for this. They call it the language of the jackal. When someone is deeply triggered, they go into jackal mode. They communicate entirely through demands, diagnoses, and judgments. You are selfish. You are trying to hurt me.
And jackals cannot hear logic. The evasion of facts in this moment is not malice. It is an ego defense mechanism. Let's look at the biology of it. Her brain perceives her insecurity as a literal threat to her survival, to her place in the relationship. To protect herself from the agonizing vulnerability of saying, "I feel incredibly ugly right now and I'm terrified you don't desire me," she throws up a shield. In formal logic, we call these red herrings or trivial objections. She attacks your intent because it is easier to be angry at a villainous husband than it is to sit with the crushing weight of her own insecurity.
Okay, I understand the theory. The brain is protecting itself. But I want to push back with a highly practical, very real problem that gets brought up constantly in discussions about NVC in our source material. Modern psychology constantly tells us to validate our partner's feelings. But how do I validate a statement like, "You are no longer attracted to me," or "You want to humiliate me," when it is objectively 100% false? If I validate it, aren't I just confirming her worst fear?
This is the tightrope walk of intimate conflict. The crucial distinction you have to make is that validating a feeling is not the same as validating a fact.
Let's underline that. Validating a feeling is not validating a fact. How does that sound in practice?
You do not validate the claim. You do not say, "You're right, I bought this to mock you." You validate the emotional reality generating the claim. You say, "I can see that you are feeling incredibly hurt and exposed right now."
But wait, there is a massive trap here. If I am in the middle of a heated fight in my kitchen and I suddenly switch my tone, tilt my head, and use therapist voice, saying, "Are you feeling angry because you have an unmet need for reassurance?" I am going to get a frying pan thrown at me. The sources on NBC explicitly warn against this. When people experience someone trying to psychoanalyze their deep needs in the middle of a fight, they feel infantilized. It feels incredibly condescending, and their ego defense mechanisms just go into overdrive.
Oh, that is a very real danger. Using clinical NVC vocabulary during a heated argument is like throwing water on a grease fire. It sounds manipulative. You have to drop the clinical terms entirely and use what negotiation experts call tactical empathy. Tactical empathy is demonstrating that you deeply understand their perspective without necessarily agreeing with it. And this is exactly where we bring Daniel Dennett's Rappaport's rules into the living room.
This is where it all comes together. We are going to combine the logical structure of steel manning with the emotional decoding of NVC to de-escalate the "you bought this to make me look stupid" scenario. Let's walk through the exact steps of how this conversation should actually go.
Okay, step 1 of Rappaport's rules. Restate their position so clearly and fairly that they say, "Yes, that's exactly it." But remember our rule from earlier. We are steel manning the person, not the argument. We are not debating the receipt or your pure intentions. We are restating their emotional reality. We are naming the unexpressed premise.
So instead of saying, "I didn't mean it that way," which is defending the strategy, I focus on the need. I would look at her and say something like, "It sounds like this gift hit a really raw nerve. You feel like it highlights an insecurity you carry about your neck, and because we are so close, it feels like I should have intrinsically known that and protected you from it, and because I didn't protect you from it, bringing it into the house feels like a betrayal.
Stop right there. Notice what you did. You didn't admit to malice. You didn't agree the earth is flat, so to speak. You simply articulated the mechanics of her pain. You gave words to the fear the jackal couldn't express. And if you do it with genuine tactical empathy, her neurological response will shift. The amygdala will realize it's not under attack. You will likely see a physical softening, a deep sigh, and she will say, "That's right."
Once we get the "that's right," we move to step 2. Find common ground.
You build the bridge. You say, "We absolutely agree that I never want to bring anything into this house that makes you feel bad about yourself. Your comfort, your confidence, and your feeling of safety are paramount to me.
Step 3. Lessons learned.
I am learning right now how sensitive this specific issue is for you. I didn't realize the depth of that insecurity before this moment, but I see it clearly now, and I understand why this specific style of jewelry triggered that pain."
And finally, step 4. The rebuttal. Or, in the context of a marriage, the truth.
Because you have built the bridge of tactical empathy, you have disarmed the amygdala. You have earned the right to state your truth without it being perceived as a defensive counterattack. You say, "Because I love you, and because I look at you and genuinely think you are the most beautiful woman in the world, my intention was to celebrate you. I wanted to highlight you. But I understand now that the impact of my action completely missed my intent, and I am sorry for the impact."
That is incredibly powerful. You haven't capitulated to a false reality so your own boundary of truth remains intact, but you haven't invalidated her emotional experience either. You addressed the fear of the invisible dragon without having to pretend the dragon was real. But let's play devil's advocate here, because relationships are messy.
Oh, well.
What if she still uses the gingerbread man tactic? What if, after all that beautiful, regulated, tactical empathy, she crosses her arms and says, "No, I know you're lying. You're just trying to psychoanalyze me with tricks to get out of trouble. You hate me."
If you extend the olive branch of clarity, and the other person remains entirely committed to bad faith if they refuse to cooperate with Grice's maxims and insist on assigning you malicious motives, you've hit the limit of the tools. At that point, you have to go back to Shane Snow's advice on depersonalizing and creating space.
You don't keep punching the blurry wall. If the cognitive load is entirely on you, you will break.
You set a firm, loving boundary. You say, "I am putting distance between us and this idea right now. I love you too much to participate in a debate where we are just hurting each other and assigning malicious motives. Let's put a pin in this and talk when we can both assume good intent."
It brings us right back to the boxing ring metaphor from the Braver Angels Rules of Civil Debate. Rule 2 says, no hitting below the belt. If your opponent starts throwing low blows, if they start saying, "I know you better than you know yourself," or calling you a liar, you do not punch them in the face in retaliation. You step out of the ring. You refuse to participate in a discourse that has descended into rhetorical pathology.
And stepping out of the ring is not losing. It is not surrendering. It is preserving the integrity of the relationship for a time when both parties are biologically and emotionally regulated enough to actually negotiate truth again.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've traveled from the highly structured halls of parliamentary procedure through the bizarre burden-shifting logic of flat earthers and yellow monkeys on rainy Tuesdays, right down into the messy, beautiful, trigger-filled reality of a marriage.
And the through line is that the logical fallacies that tear apart our public discourse, the appeal to ignorance, the straw man, the red herring, are the exact same mechanical failures that tear apart our intimate relationships. Human psychology doesn't change just because you walk through your front door.
We have learned that whether you're facing a political extremist online or a deeply painful marital accusation on your anniversary, the solution is never to just throw facts at an emotional wall. You cannot logic someone out of a position that they didn't logic themselves into. By using the 3 rules of civil debate to establish facticity and preserve the person, Rappaport's rules for steel-manning the human being, and nonviolent communication to decode the unexpressed premises, we can connect with the frightened, protective person underneath the absurd argument.
It requires an immense amount of intellectual humility and emotional regulation on your part. It requires you to resist the deeply ingrained urge to just scream, "You're insane," and instead pause and ask, what is the unmet need driving this behavior? What is the fear underneath the jackal?
So, to you, listening right now, the next time you're faced with a claim that makes your jaw drop, a claim so wild it makes you want to pull your hair out, remember that you do not have to prove the invisible dragon doesn't exist. You do not have to burn calories hunting for yellow monkeys in the Amazon. You just have to be willing to look at the person across from you and ask why they are so afraid of them.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture of how we live our lives, I want to leave you with a final reflection that builds on Rule 3 of civil debate, the externalization of scoring. In a formal debate, only your opponent can award you points. What if we lived our personal lives with that exact same rule? What if, in your marriage, your friendships, your family, you couldn't award yourself points for being logically correct? What if you couldn't give yourself points for having good intentions? What if the only points that mattered, the only true measure of success in a conflict, were the points your partner awarded you for making them feel genuinely heard and understood? How would that shift your perspective? How would that change the way you argue tomorrow?
Because when the X-ray machine of logic is broken and the facts are obscured by fear, maybe understanding the person is the only cure we really have. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the architecture of argument. We will see you next time.